My name is Dr. Sofia Martinez, and I learned that some people will destroy family bonds and steal inheritances to secure their own children's futures, but life has a cruel way of forcing them to beg the very person they betrayed when their precious child's life hangs in the balance. When my father, Dr. Richard Bennett, remarried 5 years after my mother's death from cancer, I thought I was gaining a family that would help heal the wounds left by years of grief and loneliness. My father had been devastated by my mother's passing, struggling to balance his demanding career as a cardiovascular surgeon with raising a teenage daughter, who was still processing her own loss and trying to build an identity without her mother's guidance and support. Vivian Crawford appeared in our lives like a guardian angel, arriving as the new hospital administrator at the medical center where my father worked and quickly establishing herself as someone who understood the pressures and demands that came with medical careers. She was elegant, intelligent, and seemingly devoted to helping my father rebuild his life while supporting my academic ambitions and plans to follow in his footsteps by becoming a doctor myself. Vivian's integration into our family seemed natural and beneficial, as she brought organizational skills and social connections that helped my father manage his professional obligations while creating a more stable home environment for both of us. She appeared genuinely interested in my studies, frequently asking about my science courses and expressing pride in my academic achievements and acceptance to a prestigious pre-med program. The family dynamic became more complex when Vivian moved into our house with her 15-year-old daughter Madison, a beautiful but fragile girl who had been struggling with various health issues since childhood and required constant medical attention and emotional support. Madison had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that affected her immune system, making her susceptible to infections and requiring expensive treatments that had consumed most of Vivian's savings before she married my father. My father's medical expertise and connections in the healthcare industry made him uniquely qualified to help Madison receive the specialized care she needed, and his genuine compassion for sick children motivated him to become deeply involved in managing her treatment and coordinating with various specialists who could address her complex medical needs. Madison's health challenges awakened his protective instincts in ways that reminded me of how devoted he had been to caring for my mother during her cancer battle. Vivian's gratitude for my father's dedication to Madison's medical care seemed authentic and touching, as she frequently spoke about how blessed they were to have found someone who understood the challenges of serious illness and possessed the knowledge and resources necessary to provide hope where other doctors had offered only limited treatment options. Her emotional responses to my father's efforts to help Madison appeared genuine and created a bond between them that went beyond romantic attraction. Madison's personality was everything I wasn't: delicate, artistic, and naturally gifted at inspiring protective feelings in adults who wanted to shelter her from the harsh realities of her medical condition, while I was focused, ambitious, and determined to succeed in the competitive world of medical education. Madison was dreamy and creative, expressing herself through poetry and art that reflected her unique perspective on life and mortality. The favoritism in our household began subtly, with my father spending increasing amounts of time researching Madison's condition and consulting with specialists who might offer new treatment approaches, while my academic achievements and medical school preparations received less attention and enthusiasm than they had before Vivian and Madison joined our family. Madison's medical needs naturally took priority over my educational milestones, creating a dynamic where her health crisis consistently overshadowed my successes. Vivian's influence over my father grew stronger as Madison's condition required more intensive management, positioning herself as the devoted mother whose child's survival depended on my father's continued support and medical expertise. She skillfully presented Madison's medical expenses as investments in a young girl's future, while suggesting that my educational costs were less urgent since I was healthy and capable of earning scholarships or taking student loans. The financial inequality became apparent when Madison needed expensive experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, leading to my college fund being redirected to pay for medical procedures that offered uncertain benefits but represented the only hope for improving her long-term prognosis. My father justified this decision by explaining that Madison's immediate medical needs were a matter of life and death, while my education could be delayed or funded through alternative means. Madison's medical treatments were successful enough to stabilize her condition, but they also created ongoing expenses that consumed increasing amounts of my father's income and savings, leaving less money available for my medical school applications and CAT preparation courses and other educational investments that I had been counting on to achieve my career goals. Vivian consistently supported prioritizing Madison's medical needs over my educational expenses. The psychological manipulation intensified as Vivian began sharing subtle criticisms of my personality and behavior with my father, suggesting that my focus on academic achievement and career planning showed a lack of empathy for Madison's struggles and an inability to appreciate how fortunate I was to enjoy good health. She positioned my ambition as selfishness and my independence as evidence that I didn't value family relationships. Vivian's campaign against me included carefully orchestrated moments where my normal teenage behavior was presented as evidence of disrespect or ingratitude, while Madison's health-related mood swings and demands for attention were treated as understandable responses to her medical condition. The double standard became more pronounced as my father began viewing my complaints about unfair treatment as proof of the character flaws that Vivian had identified. The most devastating betrayal occurred during my senior year of high school, when I discovered that my father had changed his will to leave the majority of his assets to Vivian and Madison, reasoning that Madison's ongoing medical needs would require substantial financial resources throughout her lifetime, while I was healthy and capable of supporting myself through my medical career. The inheritance that I had expected to receive was restructured to provide me with a modest trust fund, while ensuring that Madison would never lack for medical care. My father's estate planning documents also transferred ownership of his medical practice and real estate investments to Vivian, positioning her as the primary beneficiary who would have discretion over how remaining assets were distributed after his death. The arrangement effectively made Madison my father's heir, while reducing me to the status of a distant relative who would receive minimal financial support despite being his biological daughter. When I confronted my father about the will changes, he explained that Madison's medical condition made her more vulnerable and deserving of protection, while my health and intelligence gave me advantages that she would never possess. He claimed that leaving equal inheritances would be unfair to Madison, who needed financial security to compensate for her physical limitations and uncertain life expectancy. Vivian supported my father's reasoning by arguing that truly loving parents make sacrifices to protect their most vulnerable children, and that my resistance to the new estate planning showed a lack of maturity and family loyalty that proved I wasn't ready for the responsibilities that came with substantial inheritance. She suggested that earning my own success would be more character-building than relying on inherited wealth. The complete transformation of my relationship with my father became clear when I was accepted to medical school but couldn't afford the tuition without the educational support that he had promised throughout my childhood. My applications for financial aid were complicated by his substantial income, but his actual contribution to my education expenses was limited by Madison's ongoing medical costs and Vivian's influence over family budget decisions. My father's response to my financial needs was to suggest that I should consider less expensive career paths or take out substantial student loans rather than expecting him to sacrifice Madison's medical care for my educational ambitions. He seemed genuinely unable to understand why I felt betrayed by his decision to prioritize his stepdaughter's needs over his biological daughter's future. The painful decision to attend a less prestigious medical school with a partial scholarship meant accepting a career trajectory that was significantly different from what I had planned, but it also motivated me to prove that I could achieve success through my own determination rather than relying on family support that had been redirected to someone else's benefit. Medical school was financially and emotionally challenging, but it also provided me with the knowledge and skills necessary to understand Madison's condition from a professional perspective, revealing treatment approaches and management strategies that could improve her quality of life while reducing the ongoing medical expenses that had consumed so much of my father's resources. My residency training in pediatric oncology gave me specialized expertise in treating children with complex medical conditions, including immune system disorders similar to Madison's diagnosis. The clinical experience taught me about cutting-edge treatments and research protocols that weren't widely available but could offer significant benefits for patients with rare genetic conditions like hers. The ironic twist that brought Vivian back into my life occurred 8 years after I had established my own medical practice, when Madison's condition suddenly deteriorated. Despite years of stable management, the treatments that had been successful throughout her teenage years became less effective as her immune system continued weakening, creating a medical crisis that threatened her life and exceeded the expertise of her current medical team. Madison's doctors recommended experimental treatments that were only available through specialized research programs, but her complex medical history and previous treatment failures made her ineligible for most clinical trials. The few remaining options required connections with research institutions and specialists who were familiar with her rare condition and willing to accept high-risk patients. Vivian's desperate search for solutions led her to discover that I had become a leading expert in treating children with immune system disorders and had connections with research programs that might accept Madison as a patient. My reputation in pediatric medicine and relationships with major medical centers positioned me as possibly the only person who could help Madison access the experimental treatments that represented her last hope for survival. The phone call from Vivian was the first contact we had shared in over 5 years, as she explained Madison's deteriorating condition and asked if I would be willing to use my medical expertise and professional connections to help save her daughter's life. Her request was presented as a desperate mother's plea that transcended the family conflicts and betrayals that had divided us in the past. Vivian's approach was carefully humble, acknowledging that our previous relationship had been damaged by misunderstandings and poor decisions, while emphasizing that Madison's life hung in the balance and that professional medical help was more important than personal grievances. She seemed to believe that my medical oath and compassionate nature would motivate me to set aside family history for the sake of saving a young woman's life. The conversation was surreal, as Vivian tried to convince me that Madison's medical crisis was more important than the years of manipulation and financial betrayal that had destroyed my relationship with my father and derailed my original career plans. She seemed genuinely surprised that I didn't immediately agree to drop everything and dedicate myself to solving Madison's medical problems without any acknowledgement of how her actions had affected my life. I explained to Vivian that Madison's current crisis was the result of years of mismanaged medical care and inadequate understanding of her condition, problems that could have been prevented with better treatment decisions and more knowledgeable specialists. Her medical situation had been complicated by the very approach that Vivian and my father had chosen, prioritizing expensive treatments over comprehensive care and expert consultation. However, I also recognized that Madison was an innocent victim of her mother's manipulation and my father's poor judgment, and that her medical condition wasn't her fault even if the family dynamics that surrounded her care had been toxic and destructive. As a pediatric specialist, I had a professional obligation to provide medical expertise when a child's life was at stake, regardless of personal conflicts with family members. I agreed to evaluate Madison's medical records and provide consultation about treatment options, but I made it clear that any involvement in her care would be strictly professional, rather than personal, and that Vivian shouldn't expect our medical collaboration to repair the family relationships that had been damaged by years of favoritism and financial betrayal. The medical consultation revealed that Madison's condition had indeed deteriorated to a critical point, but it also showed that several treatment approaches hadn't been properly explored and that her current medical team lacked experience with her specific genetic disorder. My expertise in immune system conditions allowed me to identify potential solutions that could stabilize her condition and improve her long-term prognosis. I was able to connect Madison with a clinical trial for experimental gene therapy that specifically targeted her type of immune deficiency, providing her with access to cutting-edge treatments that weren't available through conventional medical channels. My professional reputation and relationships with research institutions opened doors that had been closed to her previous medical team. The treatment protocol I recommended for Madison required substantial lifestyle changes and ongoing medical monitoring, but it offered genuine hope for managing her condition effectively while reducing the financial burden that had consumed my father's resources for so many years. The approach emphasized prevention and immune system strengthening rather than expensive crisis interventions. Madison's response to the new treatment plan was dramatically positive, with significant improvements in her immune function and overall health that exceeded what her previous doctors had thought possible. The success of the experimental therapy validated my medical expertise while demonstrating that her condition could be managed more effectively with proper understanding and treatment approaches. Today, Madison continues to thrive under the medical protocol I established, while Vivian has been forced to acknowledge that the daughter she had prioritized over me is alive, because of the medical expertise that I developed despite her attempts to undermine my education and career. My father has also had to confront the reality that his favoritism and poor judgment nearly cost Madison her life by preventing her from receiving the specialized care she needed. The role reversal has forced Vivian to recognize that the stepdaughter she had marginalized and financially betrayed became the only person capable of saving her biological daughter's life. She learned that destroying family relationships and stealing opportunities from one child to benefit another can have consequences that ultimately threaten the very child she was trying to protect. My relationship with my father remains complicated, but Madison's medical crisis has helped him understand that his estate planning decisions and financial priorities had been based on Vivian's manipulation rather than genuine concern for his children's welfare. That experience has forced him to confront the damage that favoritism and poor judgment had caused to our family relationships. The moral of this story isn't that medical expertise always provides opportunities for dramatic revenge or that family betrayals are guaranteed to create situations where justice is served, but rather that genuine achievement and professional dedication often provide people with the power to help or refuse help when those who wronged them face desperate circumstances and need the very skills they had tried to prevent from developing.